Welcome back to Birds of a Feather Talk Together. Last week we talked about the Puteki Teki, so this week we wanted to talk about a bird a little closer to home, the mallard duck. The migration movie is out, and we wanted to dive a little further into these dabbling ducks. Why are they so widespread? Where does the male's green head go when it's not mating season? One thing is for sure, you'll never look at curly fries the same way after this episode. Okay, go grab your binoculars and let's get into it. Welcome back, everyone, to Birds of a Feather Talk Together. This is RJ, and I'm with Amanda and John and Shannon, as always. Episode 2 of the new year. We're going to talk about the mallard duck. But I think before we get into that, we want to talk a little bit about the Christmas bird count. So John and Shannon, we talked to you guys before Christmas. And John, you were teaching us just a little bit about the Christmas bird count. Amanda and I have never, participated in it and are familiar, but just wanted to see if you could talk a little bit more about that, just for our listeners that don't know about it.
Yeah, well, it's this annual event that takes place coming on the run up to Christmas and then into just past New Year's every year. And it was started in 1900 in New York City. And Frank Chapman, who was a curator of birds at the American Museum, basically wanted people to think about looking at birds as opposed to just killing them and putting them in hats at the time, which was something that was fairly prevalent. And it's evolved into this event that has thousands and thousands of participants across the U.S., Canada, and into Latin America, going out every year. And a circle is put on a map, and the one stipulation across the country is that circles don't overlap, so they can touch, but they aren't geographically overlapping. And they have a 15-mile diameter or radius. I can never remember which one, 15-mile radius, I think. And what people do is they go into those circles and count every single bird they can during the day. And different counts, of course, are happening in all kinds of different geographies across the U.S. And I've been doing it, I realized, for 50 years since I was a kid growing up in Arizona, where I would do Christmas counts like Nogales, Arizona, where we would literally go through our area on the Nogales Christmas count, which included this count circle crossover into Mexico. And back then there was a barbed wire fence at the border that we could literally go under and go bird in Mexico if we wanted to for a little bit, and then come back and finish up the rest of our area. And it's all about wintering birds, and the way it's done is systematic enough that these data are actually useful to look at population trends of birds from a scientific perspective. So it's one of the first it's the first big example of citizen science in the U.S. birding community, really. And, so the predecessor of eBird and things, and it's a great tradition. And one of the big things to do is there's a compilation at the end of the day on many of the counts where everybody comes in and you get to find out what good birds people found in their area that they didn't expect. And so the count that I went on this year was up in Blanchardville, Wisconsin, which is one that Dave Willard, our retired collection manager, has been doing for over 50 years. He grew up as a young birder in Madison, Wisconsin. And we get together and we divide that circle up into 4 areas, and it's a bunch of farmland west of Madison. And we go out and we count birds. And the temperature this year when we started was 15 degrees, and it got up to about maybe 30 during the course of the day. So it was cold. And yet, there are birds there. And we saw things like pileated woodpeckers, which are resident there. But we also had northern shrikes there. We had birds like tufted titmouse, which is an interesting one because over the years that we've been doing the count, they didn't used to occur in the area, and they've gradually increased their range northward. And so you see all these interesting things associated with trends as you've gotten a chance to do that over time. And so it's a fun event, and there are lots of Christmas counts in the Chicago area, for instance, but anywhere you live, you could find a Christmas count within shouting distance of you that you could potentially go on. And it's run by the National Audubon Society.
Yeah, as long as you don't get frostbite and die. It's too cold for me. Even in Louisiana, it was too cold.
I mean, in Christmas counts in Louisiana, we've had problems with mosquitoes. As a little kid growing up in Arizona, I used to complain when it was 45 degrees in the morning. So you realize that everything's different. I used to read the Christmas count issue, and they would always bring the summaries. And one of my favorite ones to look at every year was Nome, Alaska, where sometimes the only birds they would see would be a couple of common ravens at the dump. And they would be going around by snowmobile. And it's just, so again, it's like really highlights that there are birds everywhere. And the neat thing is in this area, you get, and one of the things you get with these data is a sense of numbers. And so the bird we're talking about today, mallard, is a perfect example of a bird that has an incredible distribution across North America. And Christmas counts are a great way to get an idea of how they're doing in different parts of the country.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to segue into our mallard discussion. Although, did you say you saw any mallards this year on Christmas bird count?
So we have a little bit of water along the Pecatonica River, which never freezes. And so we get mallard in our area some years, but only a couple. But there's a place called Yellowstone Lake on the Christmas count circle. And Dave Willard had several hundred this year that showed up at dusk to roost on the ice on the river or on the lake. And it's just, again, mallards are ubiquitous across almost all parts of North America, which makes them such an interesting bird.
Yeah, it's really impressive how kind of widespread they are. They're kind of all over North America, it seems like. What is it about them that has allowed them to thrive versus other ducks? Amanda and I have been looking more at other ducks this winter, and it's kind of opening our eyes to how many different kinds of ducks are out there. What is it about mallards that allows them to be all over the place and thrive more than other ducks?
I'd say I think we don't really know.
Mm-hmm.
They're certainly more tolerant of people than other species of ducks. But, that's something that Shannon's brought up in some of the previous discussions we've had. We don't really know what the basis for that tolerance is in a species like mallard versus, say, blue-winged teal or canvasback or redhead. Sometimes it's the way they feed. So mallards are dabbling ducks, which is there's a split within the ducks where you've got some species that are actually physically diving in below the surface of the water to eat shellfish or catch fish. And mallards are dabblers, which makes them really adaptable to shallow water conditions. And that means they can use ponds and parks and places like that. So maybe that's part of it.
I don't know. I can't believe we're actually talking about ducks. Ducks are not my most favorite group of birds in the world. I don't know why. No, it's kind of strange. But if I divorce that away from what they actually are, when you look at them, I mean, even though they're common, we have 799 in our collections. That's a lot of fairly big birds, right? But if you look at them up close, they have this green iridescent head that is really amazing. They have a blue speculum, which is kind of what they call an area. I realized it had never dawned on me so much until I started thinking about this episode that what most women think of when they think of a speculum. And
Amanda
it's
said
not.
I was telling RJ what that was earlier.
Yeah, and
said it's not a happy thought.
No, it's not a pretty blue stripe on the wing feathers of a bird. But actually, Amanda, I'm going to send you a picture of a bird, a mallard, kind of leaving the ground, and the way the specula line up look a lot like the thing that they torture women with to keep them safe from cancer. But that's the first time I ever thought about why that word. Yeah. So
we were going over the notes and we typed up today, and I showed Amanda, and Amanda was like, "What is that?" She was like, "Do you know what that means?" I was like, "I think it's a stripe on the bird." And so I have in my notes, I crossed it out. I was like, I'm not going to say that word.
Yeah. I told him what it was, and he was like, oh.
I mean, we have to talk about what words mean, because I realize all the time that I use words that nobody else knows. Why would anybody know what a tippet is? That's a crazy word. I didn't even know what it was until today. But a speculum, that's a word that a lot of people would know, but they would have no idea what it means associated with a bird. So we could say, well, the specula is this incredibly beautiful, kind of deep blue, but people are like, a blue speculum? What the heck? What are they talking about? Because we all use words that are kind of in our own professional life that don't translate necessarily very well. I feel like this when I listen to some of the economics podcasts that I listen to. I have to have a dictionary open on my computer when I listen to them, because I have to look up words. I have to look up the same words, unfortunately, over and over and over again. But, but that's one thing that keeps people out of bird watching or out of science, is the jargon that gets used. And I did not grow up in a family that had a lot of higher education. There are no scientists in my family. And so I'm very conscious of the fact that I use words that I have to define, because, the people I care about the most won't understand what I'm talking about. So
people, our listeners that don't know what a speculum is, are Googling it right now.
I know.
That's right.
And they're like, what's the matter with them?
So I thought it was cool, but both the male and the female share that speculum stripe. Is that right? It's in the same place. There's the male and the female look so different, but they both share that stripe or patch on their wing in the same place, which I didn't realize until doing the research. So I thought that was pretty cool.
Yeah. And again, those are structural colors. It's not blue dye that makes those things blue. It's not green dye that makes the head green. Those are all the way the melanin, air, keratin, and all of that stuff is inside of the feathers. That's what makes this iridescent come back to your eyes, these blue colors and green colors. So they really, I should stop being biased against ducks.
I was just going to say, it shows up in lots of different species of these dabbling ducks, for instance. That's where it's most common within the ducks.
How similar do the male and the female look when it's not breeding season? Does the male, feathers actually change colors? And I don't know, I feel like this is a dumb question, but me and Amanda at times of the year are like, wow, there's a lot of female ducks out here. And then some time of the year, we're like, oh, it's a 50-50 split. And then the more we're researching, we're like, wait, maybe those weren't all female that we're seeing.
So it depends on the time of year, right? So there's this molting cycle that happens in with these mallards, and the males actually, both males and females go through molts, but the females look basically the same year round. And mallards, actually, the males go through these eclipse plumages, which is after the breeding starts. And one of the things that's true about most ducks is there's almost no parental care. So the males actually abandon the female and let her do all the work. And I think that's at some level associated with the fact that you've got this male that's probably being chosen based on its plumage coloration. But that plumage coloration is the kind of thing that would actually attract a predator more readily than the plumage of the female would. And so the males actually often leave the area, but then they go through a molt, and the molts, during molt, if they're molting the wings, there's a period of time for about 3-4 weeks where they can't fly. Oh. And so you don't want to look very bright and conspicuous if you're going, if you can't get away from predators in the ways that you normally could. And so they definitely molt into this, they go through this period of time where they have this dull plumage before they molt again into the bright breeding plumage.
Yeah, I think it's underappreciated that birds molt, because unless you pay attention to the duck part, like you did, right? All of a sudden, every duck looks female. Well, that's not likely. But life is hard for feathers, and there's a lot of wear. And if being brightly colored is what you use to put your genes into the next generation, you got to get some fresh feathers in, at least once a year. So there's lots of birds. I guess every bird must molt, but not on the same schedule. But yeah, so they do look really different at some parts of the year. And it's to be weird to be so vulnerable, get up and fly. That's a pretty good thing to be able to do to get away from predators, right? But the idea that for, several days they can't do that, or that they grow them in so quickly is pretty amazing too. I mean, if you think about how fast hair grows, it would be many months before you grew your hair out that long as these wing feathers are. So they're clearly a lot of energy has to go into growing feathers during molt.
And how similar do like the female northern shovelers look? This is another debate that Amanda and I have had when we're looking at ducks. Are there northern shovelers in like the Chicago area?
So they come through during migration, both spring and fall. And then they winter further south of here and for the most part breed further north of here, I would say. And so the difference, so morphologically, they look a little bit similar, but the big morphological difference in a shoveler is that it's called a shoveler because it's got this big, broad bill. And once you get used to looking at them, the shape of a shoveler is really different than a mallard.
Okay.
Then so that's the key way that you can tell them apart in the non-breeding season if you saw some eclipse birds.
Okay.
Makes me think in the
breeding season. Yeah. Well, it's neat. I mean, going out in the spring. I mean, one thing that's fun about these ducks is they migrate through here in the spring, and then in the fall they come through pretty fast for the most part. But there are areas in the outlying suburbs with lakes, things like Boosie Woods and places where there are ponds that can you can get a good number of ducks depending on the right day in the fall.
So other fun facts about ducks. So most of the ducks that you eat in a restaurant or that you might cook are domesticated ducks, domesticated from mallards. And so, except for Muscovy duck, which is a strange looking duck that is also eaten, but the other ducks are, for the most part, just some derivative of mallards that humans have been domesticating for a long time.
This says something about their distribution too, which is that the domestication may have taken place actually first in China, something like 2,000 years ago. And mallards have this completely northern hemisphere distribution, but it's all parts of the northern hemisphere. And so there are populations all across Asia and Europe, and they've been around humans for a long time.
And do ducks like to be they spend time with other ducks? Like a lot of times now that we're starting to pay attention, we used to only look at mallards, but now we're seeing it seems like they all either have a similar habitat or that they like spending time together.
I think some of that's shorebirds are kind of the same way, right? Where you get these congregations on beaches that involve multiple species. And I think a lot of it has to do with the foraging habitat that may be most productive being kind of patchy around the edge of a lake, for instance. And so in some cases, you'll see diving ducks are going to more likely be out in the middle of the lake because they're going after things that are under the water and are in deeper situations. But the dabbling ducks, and there are a bunch of species around here like shovelers that we've been talking about, but also gadwall and pintail and black duck, various species of teal. And, they're dabblers. And so they forage around the edges. And I'm guessing that a lot of the productive areas are fairly patchy. And so it makes sense that they would actually be congregating together, and they're fairly tolerant of one another in those situations, except during the breeding season.
Okay. And John and Shannon, I wanted to ask something. We've read over the years about the breeding.
Mm-hmm. I knew this was coming.
Habits. Okay, good. Thank you, Shannon. RJ does not like to talk about this.
You have to.
So please,
I'm turning red.
Tell us. He it makes him sick to his stomach for some reason.
Well,
Can you tell us about their special parts and
well, one of the things when you are teaching ornithology and you're going out bird watching with novel groups of people, one of the things you do is you take them to a park so you can show them ducks. Ducks are on the water. They're big. And then all of a sudden they're like, what are those ducks? What is happening there? What is that duck doing? And there is then you're like, how do I talk to a bunch of people about what's actually going on in this water? But they do. There's a lot of forced copulations, which I guess that's could be the scientific term. We won't get so human focused on that. And so when it's breeding season, these birds, the male birds, are programmed to breed. And one of the cool things that people have learned over the last little while about mallards is that mallards actually have a penis. Not that many birds have a penis. And the mallard penis can be like 20 centimeters, what's that, 8 inches or something like that, long. And it's corkscrewed. And it has like spiky things on it.
Oh,
So that they can insert it into the female and it's harder to get out. So if you're going to force a female to copulate, if all you do is touch the cloaca, you're going to probably be not very successful. So that's why they have a penis likely. But the really cool thing that we know now is that the female's vagina is corkscrewed in the opposite direction and has little pockets in it, dead end pockets. So the female even can choose whether or not that sperm is actually going to fertilize an egg by opening up one of the little dead end pockets, and the sperm will get deposited in a dead end pocket and not getting all the way up into the further up into the reproductive system to fertilize an egg. So yeah.
Whoa, wait, does she have like can she do that through her own will?
Yes.
Or is that something her body does?
No.
Like, so she can decide?
Yes.
No, okay.
She can decide whether that sperm is going to get further or whether that sperm is going to go into whether she opens up one of the blind pouches in her vagina. I know, it's just completely and utterly wild. And if you look online, you'll see pictures of duck penises that will just blow your mind. I mean, who knew?
That's amazing. So why do mallards have them? And like, do all ducks have them or
No.
penises?
No.
Okay.
And when I was looking,
But a lot of ducks do.
yeah, I was looking online because I was curious as to how on social media sites and stuff, how people have commented on this, because it's really pretty shocking, right? When people learn these things. And someone said, well, I'll never look at curly fries the same way again. And I thought that was absolutely hilarious.
That's awesome. Oh my gosh.
So
Wait, so why would ducks have them and not other birds?
I don't know,
I
because
think
they
that's
can grow them.
I mean, those are
don't know.
questions that evolutionary biologists. Yeah, I mean, some of those things are maybe associated with female parental care alone, and so you get this disconnection of male association with rearing the young, and that opens up opportunities for different traits to go weird directions. It's the interesting thing on that is a lot of times that's just storytelling on our part, where it can be really hard to get good data to nail down the pattern. And so that's one, coming back to Shannon's comment about species not having penises, is you start wondering, how does that correlate with aspects of parental care and things? And the prediction would be that if there's more parental care, maybe there's not the need to evolve all these conspicuous adaptations for mating with a female like that.
That is really interesting. So like, I'm thinking back to the great crested grebe we talked about. Like, that sounds like they really share parental responsibilities, and like they had this elaborate mating dance, and it's a lot more romantic. It sounds like than the mallard, and you're saying like there's a reason for that.
Ducks do pair for life, right? So they, even though they cheat, and mallards don't.
Mallards don't. So mallards pair up in the fall, and so the pair bond isn't particularly strong, and I think that's a factor too. Now, why did that evolve? Why did it go that direction as opposed to the Puteki Tekis mating like they do? I mean, those are really interesting questions that keep people like us thinking about ways to look at them and understand them. And birds of prey, for instance, the general dogma is that you've got to feed these chicks. You're feeding them meat because you go out and catch it. It's not an easy thing to do. You actually need both sexes delivering prey in order to effectively feed the young. And that may be sort of true with grebes compared to dabbling ducks. If all you're doing is going and picking up invertebrates by going into the water like that, but there is a period of time actually where the males are hanging around initially, and then not at the nest, but kind of nearby, and then they gradually take off in mallards.
Okay.
Do you think it's for safety, or what are they doing there for a little while?
Well, so the interesting thing is you've got the individuals and you've got the species, and I could imagine that from an evolutionary standpoint, that maybe what goes on within the species is that males that weren't around, if the plumage characteristic in the males is evolved such as males are brighter plumage, it may very well be true that over evolutionary time, females that are on their own actually do better because the bright male isn't around to attract predators. So, I mean, so those stories are kind of these convoluted things that we try to figure out as evolutionary biologists.
I mean, evolution is not directed, right? So it relies on changes that happen somewhat randomly and sporadically, and then selection can operate on them, or genetic drift or other forms of evolution can happen. And so, and every time you copy DNA, you have the chance to make mutations in it. And those mutations can have significant consequences, i.e. you can get cancer, or it can cause a slight change in behavior, or a slight change in color, or a slight change in perception, or whatever. And so you can have evolution branching out into lots of different directions without it being directed from point A to point B.
And here's an interesting question that I actually don't know the answer to, which is that what does parental care look like in detail in some of the related species to mallards where they've actually lost that plumage dimorphism? So there are species like mottled duck and Mexican duck, where there's some dimorphism, but it's not like the mallard males at all. The males are brown. So do they provide a little more parental care in those situations? That's a really interesting question that I actually don't know the answer to.
So
really
the
interesting.
New movie that came out, the Migration movie, is all about a family of ducks, and there's a male, and I think there's a grandpa and a mom, and they're all migrating together. So are you saying that that's not very accurate?
Yeah, I'm saying that I see the value of those to some extent, but not completely.
Have you guys seen the movie yet?
No.
No. We're
I haven't.
We've already told you we're boring.
We haven't seen it yet either.
It's just hockey season. We
were
have our
watching the trailer.
priorities.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
It does look kind of cute.
I mean,
It does
when
look
our
cute,
son
yeah.
was little,
Well,
we had make way for ducklings. And I read this book to him, this is a classic children's book, but he freaked out when he was little, and I would read it to him because the daddy duck goes away in Make Way for Ducklings. And because John was traveling a lot, his daddy went away. And so he if I even took that book off the shelf, he would just start sobbing and get so worked up.
Oh no!
That I had to put the book in the closet in his bedroom underneath blankets so that he couldn't see it and would hopefully forget that it even existed. And when we moved out of our townhouse and I pulled the blankets out of the top of his closet, that book fell out. So we still have it, but he would, so you think these nature stories, they really have like an element of truth in them, but that kind of resonate for people. So you can tell stories about things through what happens to animals that are important to people. And maybe you can get life lessons through those things that, aren't as horrible as some things. But then again, he couldn't sit through Finding Nemo. He's never watched The Lion King full. He freaked out completely at the beginning of both of those movies. It's like, why are you making me watch these? It's so horrible. Bambi is a complete another no-go. So.
Yeah. Lion King is a tough one. I remember watching that for the first time, and that's hard to get through.
Yeah.
It's sad.
But, it's circling back to migration. I mean, I like the fact that it's talking about the movement of these individuals across a landscape, which is something that mallards do. And they clearly come into contact with other birds like pigeons, which don't migrate. So, I think it's kind of getting that into kids' minds as a way in which the world sometimes works can be a good thing.
We should say that there's a really important conservation organization for ducks called Ducks Unlimited, and they are dedicated to ducks, wetlands preservation, and conservation and things like that. So that's a really important and very old, again, in the U.S., conservation organization that do support ducks. There are duck stamps that come from, there's art competitions that are really beautiful from ducks. So those are a nice thing that I thought of. But then I don't even know why I wanted to see if there was a community of people like me that don't like ducks. So I know that sounds horrible, doesn't it? But the community of people who don't like ducks is concentrated a lot in people who have swimming pools. So there are chemicals. One of them is called No More Ducks. Another one is called Duck Off that change the surface tension of water so that ducks aren't as buoyant in swimming pools. So you can dump this in your swimming pool to keep the ducks from thinking it's a good idea to sit on the... So that was my fun fact.
My gosh.
You should just...
Crazy.
Those folks should just get a couple of Canada geese or mute swans to keep the ducks away.
Keep the ducks away. Yeah.
I guess that wouldn't work.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's a good place to call it for today. We've got a mailbag question. Should we get into that real quick?
Sure.
Yeah.
I emailed this one to you guys beforehand. This is kind of a wild one. So this is from our friend Kathy at Skokie. And the subject was, do birds have feelings in their feet? And Kathy says, many years ago, I went to a carnival near Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. There was a brightly painted booth cage that had a chicken in it. You put a quarter in a slot and wacky carny music would play while the chicken began to dance or scratch and bob its head as chickens do. Performing on a black metal plate, she was rewarded with corn that came out of the dispenser. I asked the carny worker, how did they train that chicken? He said the plate gives off electric shocks. He then reassured me that birds have little feeling in their feet. Since then, this has puzzled me. Seeing ducks frozen on ponds and sleeping chickens get their feet blood sucked out by vampire bats has further confused me. Was Mr. Carney correct or just playing a trick on me?
I'd say he's playing a trick on them. I mean, birds are just tougher than people, right? Because they live outside. So if they let a little bit of, even a cut toe, which you think would be horrible, birds live okay with, even though that sounds horrible. They don't have a choice. They can't go running to their mom and say, my foot hurts. Can you take me to the doctor so I can get a stitch in it? Or get me a new pair of shoes because I have a blister. But so I But I do think birds feel pain, and I do think they could feel a shock in their feet, no question. How bad it is, that I don't know. But in terms of what happens in cold water or on ice, that is an evolutionary adaptation for being in the cold. So the blood vessels that leave your heart leave with warm blood. And so the blood vessels in the feet, the ones that are going to the feet and the ones that are coming away from the feet, are really close together so that there's heat exchange, so that your feet don't get frostbitten and fall off, that you can warm up the blood somewhat. So it's not as horrible as they stick in their feet in liquid nitrogen or something like that. They do have ways of compensating for being in the cold, and the colder it is, the better that compensation is.
But I think it is true that as the temperature gets colder in the areas where birds are living, limb length tends to decrease. So you won't see herons up in Alaska in the winter. Birds like gulls and ravens and stuff do just fine, and that's because of this mechanism that they have that Shannon was describing to keep their feet from freezing. At the same time, we got a request from a researcher fairly recently who was looking at Eurasian collared doves, which is a species that's expanded across the Midwest fairly recently after being introduced down in Florida. And he was specifically asking if we had specimens that might show evidence of frostbite. And I've taken pictures of mourning doves that very clearly are missing the tips of some of their toes. Oh. And it's definitely true that birds can get frostbite in those situations and lose digits. So it's not a out of the question thing. There's, as Shannon was saying, there's definitely sensory, there are nerves there, but at the same time, it's evolved to be as buffered from that as possible. And that's one of the reasons why they don't tend to be very fleshy.
I think back on it might have been our roseate spoonbill episode, we talked about birds standing on one leg. And do we talk about maybe one of the reasons that could be is keeping the other, like either the circulation or keeping the other leg warm and they could switch off?
Yeah, there's a reason birds have, for sure. There's a reason birds have feathers, right? And it having to do with, the maintenance of the metabolism that they have as homeotherms. And so, yeah, what do you do when your fans get cold? Put them under your arms, right? Or in your pocket or something like that that's close to your body to warm them up. And
a lot of these high latitude birds, so things like snowy owls and ptarmigan, which are these game birds from high latitudes, they have feathers all the way down their toes. And so they have increased insulation through their feathers that way. And so yeah, again, birds can do it a lot of different ways, but they definitely have blood going in there and can sense things. So that dancing chicken must have been feeling something.
Ow.
But now when Kathy she looks at birds, Kathy from Skokie will look at birds in the winter differently now, right? So
True. She sent a follow-up. There was an article that she found that was all about these little carnivals with animals back in, I forget what year it was, but, they don't do anything like that now, obviously, anymore. But she talked about a lot of it was reward, too, where they would learn something and then they'd be, given feed. But there was something about a duck that could play the piano, too. It was in the article that she sent. So that's a little...
Wow.
That's a little more pleasant than a chicken getting shocked,
I think.
Beak?
Yeah. With its beak or its feet?
It didn't say, and there weren't any pictures. In my head, I was thinking beak, but I don't know. It could be with its feet.
So one of the future episodes we'd like to do is to bring along one of our graduate students, Louise Bott, who's working on European goldfinches. And one of the stories about European goldfinches, which are very common cage birds in Europe, is that...
You shouldn't tell it now.
Oh, I won't tell it now. All right. You'll have to tune in later.
Okay, teaser.
But they've done things with I shouldn't. Yep.
Yeah. Oh, I'm excited now.
I know. I'm interested.
Yeah. This is going to be fun.
Well, and of course, we should do an episode at some point. Well, I guess we talked a little bit about birds like ravens and crows in the past in terms of, their ability to puzzle solve. And so I think it's easy to underestimate what other birds have the capacity of doing.
Well, I think that's probably a good place to call it. John, do you want to close it out?
Yeah, I mean, we've been talking about mallards today, and what I'd say is go out and look at your local water hole. And I don't mean bar in that sense. I mean, go out and, find some open water wherever you are, because water birds are really cool, and ducks in particular are often easy to see, and with some omitted caveats associated with molt and things that we talked about today, really cool to identify and differentiate from one another.
Thanks, everyone, for listening. If you have a question for us that you'd like us to read and answer on the podcast, you can send it to podcast.birdsofafeather@gmail.com. If you haven't already, make sure to click subscribe or follow in your podcast app so you always get our newest episodes sent your way. Follow us on Instagram to see amazing photos of the different bird specimen that we discuss. And also, we now just joined TikTok. There isn't any dancing, but there are a lot of cool photos of birds, so check that out. All right, thanks everyone for the support. See you all next week.